shall I do that?
I started now.
Okay, great. So yeah, so thanks everyone. It's great to be able to be the first speaker in this series, and I think it's fair enough because I'm going to start at the very beginning and tell you why we were even babies, and along the way, sort of hopefully tell you 6 surprising things that are kind of directly a result of the fact that we have a unique childhood among all the animals on the planet. Yeah, and then I look forward to the discussion at the end. So I work in the infant lab at Goldsmiths. So most my research, the most fun bits of my research look a bit like this, with a little baby coming into our lab to take part in some studies. And recently I just wrote a book about my own area of research, which is about what makes babies happy and why they enjoy being babies. So a lot of this talk comes from sort of things I was discovering myself while writing that book. And everything that I mention, I'll go very fast, but it's all available in much more detail in the book. So let's start with number 1. And the number 1 thing that babies have given us is an incredible start in life. And we'll see that this is really quite a unique thing about human life. But let's just remind you of all of what infancy looks like. So this baby here is about 6 weeks old. And you'll see that they're not really doing very much. Maybe 18 hours of the day is spent asleep at this age. A lot of, not all in one go, as new parents rapidly discover, because the rest of the time is spent eating. So eating and sleeping seems to be the order of the day for the first 3 months. We'll get on to why that is a bit later. But by 1 year, we're getting pretty good at sorts of things. So now we've got fine motor control. Quite a determined little child there. He's got a plan that doing things, having fun. Discovering something about the world. And discovering something perhaps about Mummy's reaction to what he's doing. By 2 years old, then language has really taken off by this stage, and at least in their own minds, babies are, little people. They can do everything. Sadly, we haven't got time to see all of these. They're absolutely brilliant.
Okay, but there's no sound, unfortunately.
So now we've very rapidly gone through those first 2 years, and by the end of it, they're wandering around, they're holding conversations, they're doing a kind of at least basics, sort of everything that it is that we can do. And that's kind of why I use this image here, that those first 2 years are in many ways like the training montage that you get when a superhero discovers their powers for the first time, and they're learning to use them and learning all of these new skills. And that first 2 years is really, all about exploring and discovering what on earth you are able to do. And it's it's quite incredible. It means it's a wonderful thing to study. From a psychologist's point of view, you see the foundations of everything that comes afterwards. And it's also slightly weird because this is another mammal. This one is just a few hours old, and it's in those first few hours, not perfectly, but it's learned to walk, which is quite a contrast to the year it seems to take humans to learn to walk. And it's worth stopping and thinking that that is quite a surprising thing, because actually giraffes and humans both evolved in this same environment, the African savanna, and have seemed to have taken very different approaches to what they do to survive there. The giraffe sort of grew to be the tallest animal in that environment, and we grew to be the cleverest, but being clever doesn't seem to involve being good at certain things. In fact, that's kind of the very idea of being clever as a baby, is that the approach we've taken is to be a generalist. So this is a child from a Hasda tribe in southern Africa. They are hunter-gatherers. They live a nomadic lifestyle, not too different from how our ancestors might have lived 50,000 years ago. And they, the babies that come into these families are sort of brought up in a collective environment. And it seems like the solution that we had as a species to surviving on the African savanna was not to become the specialist like the giraffe, but to become the complete generalist. So these nomadic people can travel everywhere. They're incredibly knowledgeable about their environment and how to sort of survive and maximize sort of things within that. And we've done this by growing a very large brain. So in the last 2 million years, the size of the brain of our sort of species and our ancestors has really ballooned, sort of tripling in size in the last 2 million years, which is an explosion in evolutionary terms. It was also accompanied by sort of an explosion in the size of our groups. And these two things sort of probably, well, we'll never know for sure, but theory suggests that these two things fed off of each other. So now we're on to sort of step two of, right, how do you get a great start in life? Our approach to it is to have a really big brain, and infancy is a really sort of key trick within that. So the reason that baby is so sleepy and helpless at the very beginning is because we actually keep growing the brain after the baby is born. And those first 3 months, often called the fourth trimester, really should still be spent in the womb. And then after that, the brain keeps growing, and then we start using it to try and solve all sorts of problems, many of which are related to the fact we live in this social group. So many of our problems come from other people, or so many of the challenges and complexity of our life comes from other people. And this has led psychologist Robin Dunbar to come up with a theory that the feedback for why we got a big brain, and as it became a successful evolutionary tool, was because of it went hand in hand with this social evolution. So his reasoning goes a bit like this. When it appears, yeah, so that being social requires you to have a bigger brain to keep track of who's friends with who. And the bigger your social group is, the even bigger that challenge becomes. To keep a whole social group coherent in the primate world, chimpanzees rely on grooming of each other. So you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Humans can't do that. Our social groups get too big that there just aren't enough hours in the day to do it on a one-on-one basis. And Dunbar suggests that language and sort of, in particular, sort of sharing, sort of "hello, how are you" type sort of gossip in many ways is something that you can share in a slightly bigger group, and so it can bring more people together at once. So he proposes that language was initially evolved not for hunting and tracking down, large prey in the savannah, but it was actually sort of gossiping around the campfire, keeping up with your friends. And that in the process, what's very important there is sort of sharing your emotions, sharing how you feel, and language and laughter sort of go hand in hand there. And it's going to take a long time to learn. So that is part of why we have a bigger brain and why we need sort of these slightly helpless babies. But there's even more direct sort of attribution to babies that gives us a big brain. And this comes from Steve Piondozzi and Celeste Kidd, who sort of thought that if we have these very helpless babies, then we're going to have to be good parents for them. And if we're going to have to be good parents, we're going to need big brains. But if we're going to have big brains, we're going to have to give birth to more helpless babies. They're going to have to grow those brains outside the womb. They're going to have to learn more and more things when they're presented with the world. We can't just build it in as instinct like the giraffe does for walking. There's just too many things that you need to do. So let's turn up and learn it from scratch. So we're going to turn up, but we're going to have helpless babies. And if they're helpless, that's going to require that they're going to need better parenting. So in fact, they're going to need cleverer parents. They're going to have the parents themselves are going to have bigger brains. And this creates a positive feedback loop, which leads to an increase in the size of the brain. And Piondozzi and Kidd did some computational models that showed this very nicely. So that's something else that we directly thank our helpless infancy for. Amazingly, we can also thank tiny babies and the fact they are so helpless for our long life. So anthropologist Christian Hawkes studied the Hausda people and another group called the Kung in Southern Africa, who have very different approaches to grandparenting. So in one group, grandparents will stay at home in the village looking after the younger children. In other, the grandparent actually goes out foraging and working just as hard as anybody else to gather roots and other vegetables. So what we're seeing here is that the grandmothers sort of are actively choosing sort of to invest their time and their sort of efforts into supporting their children's children, so their grandchildren. And the longer they live, obviously, the more grandchildren they can take care of. So this creates another positive feedback loop that those long-lived grandchildren, long-lived grandparents will have more surviving offspring, and those offspring will have inherited the genes for longevity. So there's another feedback loop tied to all tied to this choice that we made that our babies are helpless, that leads us to have long life. It leads to what would be one of the few species with a menopause, and a species which invests in the generation after it. It also means that societies are often in those days arranged matrilineally, that children would stay with their mother's family and as with their children's children. So that's number 3, a long life. Number 4 is that we can thank babies for science. As a baby scientist, I'm often like, always saying, oh, babies are like little scientists discovering the world. But Alison Gopnik sort of turns that on its head and say, no, you're getting it back to front. That actually that discovery and that need to sort of figure things out, to throw little goldfish off your high chair, was the starting point. That was our beginning to understand the world. And that actually the scientific process, when it came along, 50,000, 500,000 years later, is just a grown-up version of that curiosity. So it's not that children are little scientists. It's actually that scientists are big kids, and I'm happy to take that as a correction. So that's number 4. Number 5, we have even babies to thank for art. This time it's a wonderful piece of work by an anthropologist called Ellen Dissanayake, who looked at what is art, and ultimately decided that the purpose of art is to convey and share emotion. And she sort of saw that the earliest parts of that were in these ritualistic, maybe chanting around the fire and drawing cave paintings, but that the goal of those was this group cohesion again. It was about connecting with the people that you were sharing that art with, and that the first place that she sees that happening is with a mother connecting with a baby. So she says that culture and sort of art develops out of it through this sort of ceremonial and ritual behavior, but that it really started from mothers connecting and sort of holding the emotional space for their babies, maybe sort of exciting them when they're a bit sad, calming them down when they're scared, and understanding that you can sort of convey emotions to other people comes out of that connection between mother and baby. And so art itself comes out of that, not from some stupid man who's just killed a water buffalo and wants to show off about it, from something much more humane and beautiful. And I think we'll never know for sure, but I certainly like to give mothers' babies the credit for that. And just so we can show what that looks like. Yeah, amazing. And you don't have to be able to sing like that to have a connection with your baby. And I think we can see the baby really does respond to that. Which brings us very nicely to the final point, which is that babies, in my view, hold the secret to happiness too. So that's obviously part of what I've been researching for the last 10 years, the fact that babies laugh way more than we do. I think I can confidently say that babies are happier than you and I. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos. I've asked a lot of parents. I even discovered in some research I did in Brazil that babies wake up happy, which is not something that I can manage on a regular basis. But what does that mean? Where does that come from? Well, a lot of it sort of comes from the fact that the core of happiness is your connection to other people, that unconditional love and support are known to be sort of the one of the ways that you can counteract depression and the darker side of life. And babies sort of have this through their connection to their parents straight away. But there's other aspects to it too. So this is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who actually died last week, but is the world's expert on happiness. And he sort of interviewed people all over the world about who sort of some of the happiest people in all kinds of walks of life, and discovered that for these adults, that part of their secret was being able to get into a very absorbed state, doing something that was just the right level of challenging for them. So they were, very high level musicians who would just, always be pushing the quality of their work. But even postmen who just got very, very great pride in what they were doing and just like, yes, this today was just the smoothest run ever. And even people in prison who made the best out of the situation that they had, and sort of always pushing themselves to do something new, which is exactly what happens for babies every single day of their life. They're always faced with a challenge. They're always progressing in their level of skill. So I think they have part of that core of what makes us happy. They also have this ability to be very absorbed in things. And actually, they also have this ability to pay attention to the present moment. So I do a lot of meditation. I've read an awful lot about the science and the sort of the philosophy of meditation. And the key idea of meditation is to be more present. All of that sitting still, doing nothing, is not to empty your mind and sort of free yourself from worries. It's to actually sort of be present in what you're doing at any given moment, to really engage with your life in a very authentic way. And I think if you just watch anybody under 2, you'll see that that's just what they do without even thinking. And let's finish with a little reminder of that. Oh, that's everything. I look forward to your questions. Thanks to all the people who've ever taken part in my research. And yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Casper. That was fantastic. And now we can all realize that we can call ourselves superheroes as well.
Yes. Yeah, you are all super. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on their mind? You can also post your comments in the chat as well, if you rather not to say it aloud. And I'm going to also stop the recording as well, so
yeah.